To aid you in the data input process, Overwatch Live has various import procedures, and in this tutorial I'm going to go over importing residents in a little bit more detail and show you how to fill out the template so that you can save yourself a lot of time. To begin, go to the control panel, click Import Residents, and here you'll see the first step is to download the most recent version of the data import template. So if you click that, it takes you to a place where you can download the import template for your version of Overwatch Live. And what you'll get is a file that looks very similar to this, along with a PDF document that has written instructions, but I'll go through it here in a video format. So in this file, you'll see there are a bunch of fields across the top, and a lot of this information you can probably extract from the student management system that your school already uses, and really this template is just making sure that it's in the right format so that it can be easily imported. So the first field is the resident ID, and that's a unique identifier for each resident. The recommendation here is that you use the same ID that your school uses them in your student database so you can cross-reference. The next field is a username, and it's not required for the import process, but I really strongly recommend including it here so that you don't have to go and enter each username after the residents have been imported. And that really goes for all these fields. The more information that you can include at this point, the more time you're going to save later on. This username is the username the resident will use to log in to the system to manage their account. And again, if you make this the same username that they may use to access your campus network, that makes things a little bit easier. The next field over is the badge code. And this is the value that is read at the resident terminal when they scan their card. So if you know that ahead of time, you can populate that value in right here. The next field is the resident's last name, and then their first name, and we also have a spot for their preferred name. So for example, down here the student's name is Samuel, but he really goes by Sam, and that's usually what's used throughout the system as the preferred name. The next field is gender ID. You enter M for male, F for female. Email address, and this is important to include because a lot of the correspondence that takes place in the system is done through email. This next field is the mobile carrier ID, and this field is not required unless you specify a mobile phone number, which is the next column over. And the reason you have to specify the carrier ID is in the event that a resident chooses to enable text messaging. The system needs to know who their mobile carrier is so they can successfully deliver those messages. One thing you also notice is that any of these fields that has an ID at the end, there are specific values that must be entered there, and you can go into Overwatch Live to the various screens and you can look up valid IDs. So I'm using AT&T for my example here. Next column over is their mobile phone number, if they have one, home phone number. The study hall hours column allows you to indicate a value if your school has, or your residence hall has some sort of study program, and this alerts your staff to the number of hours that the resident should spend in that program if you have it. If you don't have any program, you can just enter 0. Scroll over here a little bit more. Demerit reset date. This is the date that the system uses to start calculating consequences based on your behavior tracks and the consequences that you've set up. When importing residents, the recommendation is you set this date to the first date that the resident will be active in your residence hall. So for this example, August 30th is the first day when the resident's going to be in the building. This column is for whether or not the resident wants text messaging enabled, and recommended that you actually leave this value as false and let the resident enable it on their own. And you can specify a mobile carrier ID and a mobile phone number ahead of time if you have that information. But if you leave this false, it means that the resident has to then go in and activate it themselves, and there's no discrepancy over, um, you know, whether or not or whose responsibility it is that they got the text messages and any charges that may be incurred. Next column is the behavior track ID, and this is the behavior track that you'd like the resident on. And again, you can go into your control panel and look up the valid behavior tracks or behavior track IDs that you have previously set up. Whether or not the resident is currently active, that can be true or false. Most likely it will be true for you. And these last couple fields are not required for importing, but strongly recommend you include them. The year ID is the ID representing the year that the resident is attending. So in my example, that ID is 17, and again, you can go look that up in your control panel. Grade level ID, that is for this specific year, what grade are they going to be? My first resident is going to be a senior, that's represented by a 40. The next resident is going to be a sophomore, that's represented by a 20. And then lastly, just some additional information. Their room number, if you hand out physical keys, sometimes they're stamped with a number. You can keep track of who has what key here. And if your residence hall rooms have a specific phone number, you can include that here. So that's a brief summary of the fields that you import. And again, along with this template, there's a document that goes into which fields are required and length requirements, so on and so forth. So I'm going to close this, and now I'm going to browse to it. It's called residence.xls. I'm going to select upload, and there you see some of the information that was in that file. Can't list it all because it's too much, but I can confirm, yep, those are the residents I'd like to import. I click import, and I'm done. It's that easy and can save you a lot of time.